Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.Cutuli, and we're here today for Season 2, Episode number 25, with Dr. Rachel Barbanel-Fried. And Dr. Rachel is a clinical psychologist who sees individuals, couples, and families in a therapeutic setting who are looking to move forward towards growth, change, and healing. Rachel uses an evidence-based collaborative approach, and Rachel is joining the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about the power of cultivating emotional flexibility and how we're able to use mindfulness and meditation to keep us centered. In this episode, we're going to be speaking specifically about cultivating emotional flexibility. So thank you, Rachel, for taking this time to be here on the Mental Insights Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
To really jump into it, I know, we spoke before a lot of what was going throughout in terms of, what's going through society today, and to really transition into what people are facing today and what kind of challenges can come into place. What real emotional challenges are people facing today in, conjunction with also what we're dealing with about being at home and having these challenges on top of just the normal day emotional challenges that people can face?
I mean, in short, people are dealing with all the same stuff they were dealing with before. It's just exacerbated, right? So I don't think that the coronavirus, COVID-19, stay-at-home orders, quarantine, I don't think any of this created any new struggles. But what it did was it put all of the stuff that we were carrying with us, within us, under extreme pressure. So people who were feeling anxious before are feeling anxious now. People who struggled with depression before are struggling with depression now. It's just that it really feels like the box is smaller and the intensity is amplified.
It certainly poses such a big challenge because people need that availability to, seek out external, sources, whether it's just going out to, have a walk or get some exercise, or even just to see friends, to go see your therapist. We have a lot of different challenges in terms of how someone can, cope and seek out some of these mechanisms. And in terms of the challenges to work with clients today, how much more challenges are you seeing in terms of having to speak with someone through technology rather than being there person to person, how that can affect how someone can, move throughout identifying and managing these emotions?
So, doing virtual televisits and telehealth isn't new. And in fact, the research that has been done through the VA, where they've been doing telemedicine for a really long time, is that some aspects of doing telemedicine and teletherapy specifically are actually, like, it's in some ways it's better. There's a much higher rate of compliance, right? Because, if you're going to come to my office, you got to, we first have to figure out a time. You might have to leave your house and deal with traffic, and maybe you're worried about getting to work, or maybe you have to leave work, or maybe you have to leave work early. There's all this stuff, right? You have to find a parking space, or you have to deal with the public transportation. You have to come and sit in the waiting room. So all of that goes away, right? So there's a lot more flexibility in terms of people being able to come in the middle of the day. There's a lot more, there are a lot fewer obstacles to actually coming to the meeting, right? So that is one upside that I don't think most of us were really expecting to have. There is something that's lost. I find that when I'm meeting with a person, we have a whole, in a room, we have a whole host of body language, and cues that get missed on video. And our we communicate also through our whole selves. So for instance, when you're talking about anxiety, right? Anxiety is something that, biologically speaking, is beneficial for someone else to be able to feel, right? So if we think about anxiety as coming from a place of like, is there a tiger chasing me, right? So if you're in a group, because we're group animals, right? We don't survive on our own, right? If one person sees the tiger, everybody else who like feels that anxiety with that original person is going to be able to get up and go. The person who doesn't feel the anxiety is going to be the person that gets eaten. Right? So there is something like sitting with somebody that I can sense what somebody is feeling, right? Because I'm really trained to pay attention to what's in the room together. And that's lost for sure. I do a mixture of meeting with people on video and also on the phone, right? So, and there's sort of pluses and minuses to both of those things. Meeting with somebody on the phone and not having video has actually been really beneficial to a bunch of people, especially as we've dealt with some of the more complicated issues that have come up around all of the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter issues around, people dealing with some really, really internally based shame feelings that they have said very explicitly, like, I would not feel comfortable talking to you if I had to look at your face. Right. So that's been actually a really great thing to kind of pay attention to, is that, there's pluses and minuses to everything. And for some folks, we've agreed to actually walk while we talk on the phone, which has been great for me because, traditionally I sit a lot and it's not that great for me to sit for a long time. So there are a few people that we've been able to walk together, although we don't see each other. We're not, we're in totally separate locales. We can both walk, and that's been also really great. It's been really encouraging for some folks. I was working with some people who were getting really anxious after, sort of re-entering the world started. And I was like, let's go for a walk together. So we could do some really in vivo sort of cognitive behavioral sort of techniques to get people comfortable again in being out in the world that I wouldn't have had the ability to. And, maybe in another world, they would have just said, no, I'm too anxious. I'm not going to come for my appointment.
Thank you for sharing that. Honestly wasn't something that I would have expected in terms of seeking out, some of these positive benefits that you wouldn't really expect in terms of, you assume that there would be more challenges and not as much in terms of what you can benefit from in terms of, this whole situation. And it's great to hear that there are new and innovative ways that you can work with clients and, make them feel more comfortable and more in a space that they can reach out and speak to you. Given, all of these challenges that people are, being pulled, whether it's within their social life, whether it's within their work life, whether it's in, their personal life, there's many different things that are bringing people astray, many emotions that are being, brought out throughout all these times. And to explain more, why do people really need to be emotionally aware to be able to manage and identify their emotions? How does that have, an effect on our own mental health and our own state of being?
So emotional flexibility, right, is a type of executive functioning. And executive functioning is the kind of functioning that our brains do when we're holding on and working with information, right? So focus, thinking, if we need to be able to filter out distractions, if we need to switch gears between, I'm trying to think of an example, like, working with, serving a customer versus working with the back of the house, right? Anytime you need to switch gears, you need to be able to manage that with your mind, right? And that's where emotional flexibility really comes into play. If we get stuck in a rut because we're feeling super overwhelmed because we're anxious, right? Or we get stuck in a rut because we're feeling overwhelmed because we're depressed, then we don't have the ability to be able to do multiple things at once in the same way. We can't sort of switch gears in an effective manner. We get stuck and we just can't do it all.
It certainly shows in terms of today's time, because there are parents that are trying to juggle taking care of children while still working. There's a lot of different, challenges in play, as people need to, as you're saying, be flexible in terms of the way that they work with people who they're, in their job, and then transition in order to be caring and supportive, whether it's, their child or even their partner, or even themselves for that matter. There's a lot of ways in which, that flexibility comes into play in terms of, providing benefits. And in that regard, when you have this flexibility, when you have this intelligence towards your own emotions, what benefits can be seen, whether it's on the personal level or on the work level, in terms of, how it affects the way that we perform in our everyday life?
Well, what we're talking about is in large part being able to go with the flow, right? And being able to be flexible with your thinking is a really necessary skill to deal with any of life's inevitable changes, right? And so that's why I'm saying what I said before, right? What we're dealing with now is not actually different than what we were dealing with before. It's just like crammed together, much more tightly, right? So I have kids. I had to deal with this before, how to juggle and balance work and home, right? But now everything is kind of mashed together, right? So, if we use it effectively, right, it's a trait that helps us to adjust more easily to whatever the new circumstances are, whatever the challenges are, whatever the situations are as they arise, because that's just what the only constant in life is change, right? So whatever you're going to deal with, it's going to be different.
And within these, scenarios, there's no time for you to practice or get some practical education beforehand in terms of having this experience. And in terms of that, people really have to, as you're saying, go with the flow and have to learn and manage these things as they're going throughout it. It's not like you had a preparation phase before, being stuck in your home, working a job and taking care of your kids. It was
right, of course.
Learn
right.
that.
I mean, life is the preparation, right? I mean, that's just it. I think about it in terms of like a sort of example would be, in pre-pandemic life, right? You're sitting in traffic in your car, right? And you're anxious because you're stressed because you're trying to get to work, right? And your mother calls, your boss calls, and your spouse calls, right? And you have to figure out how to deal with each of those people in a different way. And none of those people need you to respond to them in a stressed out way. That is like the sort of quintessential picture of emotional flexibility. So you can be aware of what you're holding inside of you. Wow, this really stinks. I'm in traffic. I'm going to be late for this meeting. That's really important, right? But I still am not going to respond with that internal state to whoever it is that's interacting with me on the other end of the phone. And that takes practice. And some of us are better at it, over time, and some of us are better at it in different situations. And most of us can kind of practice along the way all the time.
And for some people, as you're saying, it might take a little bit longer, and some people may need other means in terms of, creating this flexibility. And are there certain, activities or ways in which you are able to teach clients to create more of, a flexibility within their emotions of identification and management? Are there certain, activities or even, lessons that they can go through in terms of, improving this skill, besides just, putting themselves or being put into one of those scenarios?
I mean, I wish I could give you like a very clear, do this and then you'll get this, but it's not that clear that it's like input equals output. I will say that I think that bang for buck, the best thing that you can do is meditate. And the reason for that is because when we're meditating, and there are all sorts of different kinds of meditation, and there are all different kinds of schools of meditation, and there's lots of research on meditation, but what happens when we're meditating is that we're forced to slow down enough to see what's happening on an unconscious level, right? And most of us, if not all of us, have like a ticker tape that's going underneath whatever it is that's like our very conscious sort of like, what's the next thing to do? What's the next thing I'm going to say? And it's only when we can sit and really listen to ourselves that we can start to understand how is it that we're speaking to ourselves. And in that way, we can start to learn and moderate and modulate our internal voices to kind of make more sense externally. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's certainly, one of the basis in terms of, as we'll speak about in this next part of, that there are many ways that you can meditate and be mindful. And it's not just, taking a seat and being able to completely, stop all of these, external thoughts and trying to be, completely mindful in the scenario. There are ways in which, your thoughts take you to certain places and continue to, unravel it. It's, as you were saying beforehand, it's through practice. It's through having these, these times where you can learn to, take those steps. And this, as you're saying, is a way to educate yourselves on whatever emotions, thoughts, or experiences you have had or are continuing to have. And when someone's going throughout this, whether it's meditation or whether it's, working with yourself as a client, how are they able to educate themselves continuously on their emotions? Is there, any ways in which they can further this education besides just practical experience?
I mean, the reality is that practice is what we all need to do. So emotional flexibility is really strongly correlated with overall mental health, right? Which when I mean by that is that more flexibility means you are healthier, right? Which means which means also that if it's not your strong suit, you just have to practice. Right? That, there are certainly times when I respond to some external stimuli, right? Because of something that's happening inside of me. And I've been practicing this for a long time. Right? So you just have to like figure out different ways to kind of work through that. For some people that might be journaling. Right. And one of my favorite things to say is, just journal with the prompt, I feel. And no one's going to read it. If you are physically capable of writing, it's better to actually write it than type it. Give yourself 5 minutes or the space of one page and just write how I feel. Don't edit it. And you don't have to explain, this person who is the sister of that person said this. You just have to talk about how you feel. Some other things that, just is trying to actually what I call embrace the moment of suck. Right? To like remember that like, okay, here we are right now, but that doesn't mean this is where we're going to be forever. And it doesn't mean that I have to respond to everything that's happening with how I'm feeling right now. So again, that's where the mindfulness comes in, right? To pay attention to what's happening in the moment so that I can understand in the next moment, I might want to respond differently.
Wonderfully said. And that'll be something that we do, dive deeper into this next part, because as you're stating, there's, in terms of mindfulness and meditation, you're allowed to, learn from the past, or even, take how you're feeling into the present and trying to improve or better your future based on, these practical experiences. And, as you're stating, trying to become aware of this as it's happening is, the first step in order to realizing, what your thoughts are, what your emotions are, and how you can better yourself in the future. As you're stating, it all takes practice. You have to take this valuable advice as you're going throughout. And if you don't become aware of it, then you might just keep repeating some of the same, you know, emotional responses that you've had beforehand. And that's what we're trying to take those steps into to create that valuable change moving forward. So, with this being said, I think we spoke about emotional flexibility, and in this next part, we'll focus more on mindfulness and meditation to keep ourselves centered and to speak more about how we can use that as a tool to even create this emotional flexibility within our life. So thank you for being here, Rachel, and make sure that you all tune into this next part of the episode.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights Podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.